Welcome everybody to our Q&A AMA on August 8, 2023. We're going to have Dr. Nick joining us in just a moment. Don't forget that you can ask your questions. There's a link at deltacx.com/links. If you are a mid-level patron or above, for those of you Patreon members, you have your own Discord channel where you can ask questions, even anonymously, and they will be given priority. Everybody else is welcome to ask in the chat or use the anonymous link over there. And speaking of our fantastic Patreon members, we are up to over 30 now, which is great because I think this has been live for like 2 weeks. So thanks to everybody who is donating to the Delta CX and CXCC universe at any level. You can also join Patreon for free and just treat it like a mailing list and get our updates, or you can join at as little as $1 American a month. Alrighty, bot is running. Thank you, Stream Elements bot. Okay, so we're going to bring in our special guest, Dr. Nick. And remember, we're only here for an hour, so if you are watching live, get those questions in. And let me press all the buttons, and here we go. I'm going to hide up here in the corner. Hey, Dr. Nick, how you doing?
Hello. Yeah, I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Well, I'm okay. We'll have to ask the people in the chat how they're doing. Ana Lucia says hello. Dr. Nick, tell us who you are and where we can find you or throw money at you.
Nowhere. You don't need to throw money at me. I'm just the voice of reason, I think, sometimes on LinkedIn, or just a noisy voice on LinkedIn. You guys all know who I am. You know where to find me. I've got something very interesting cooking. I'm rebranding the Cult of Curiosity. I'll give you a little sneak preview. I'll give you a world exclusive. The new brand is called Synaptic, and that's what I'm going to be operating under as my new vehicle moving forwards. So you'll be seeing stuff like that.
Exciting,
so that's me
exciting.
in a nutshell.
Excellent, excellent. So Ana Lucia loves the new notifications we've set up in the Discord. The Discord is free, but if you're not a Patreon member, it is read-only, but you can find it, oh, now I'm over here, at deltacx.com/links. It is a separate Discord than Delta CX, so join all the Discords. And yes, good luck with that. I know, I never get it right, and I've been doing this 4 years now. So we did get 2 questions ahead of time, so we're going to jump right in on those. And of course, if anyone has a question, we don't have too many on the list. You will be third. So our first question looks like this. Hello friends, today is one of my favorite days of the month because Dr. Nick is our guest. This is a real case that I discussed with my friend who works for the government. They are developing a portal that will allow citizens to check different laws and legislations. However, laws often use complex language that is difficult for non-lawyers or non-highly educated people to understand. Additionally, the language itself can be ambiguous, leaving room for different interpretations. My question is, how can we ensure that information is accessible to citizens? And hello, Khadija.
Hello, question person, and hello, Khadija. So this is what's known as content design. And there are content designers that do this stuff specifically. There will be times when we do this sort of stuff as UX folk, but generally that's because there isn't a content person around, and there should be. Usually within government there is a content person because it's so critically important to the entire wider user experience. We as user researchers work really closely with content designers who often sit in on research or will watch the recordings or read the transcripts, because they want to test the understanding or the semantics of their words, of the stuff that they're writing. So in this kind of jargony world of lawyery, non-lawyery stuff, where you've got complex technical knowledge or language, a content person will know how to break that down, or how to provide the additional help or alternative supports so that people who are not specialists, i.e. citizens, can understand more complex stuff. That's kind of my answer in a nutshell. For those of us who aren't content folk, or before content folk existed, we write the stuff because we're not amazing, we're not the user. You test it, and even if you're not a content person, you can usually get through iteration, just being through user-centric and iterating, you should be able to get something that's understandable by most.
Yeah, I love that. That's definitely true. And I also dream of, I know no one's going to want to put in the time, but I dream of a little summary box. Like, think about an academic paper where you have the abstract and it's like, hey, here's some key things you might want to know about what does this law really mean. I wish that kind of stuff were available, but it takes somebody to read and understand the law and boil it down in layperson's terms. But I know when I get the Arizona elections guide, which is always a good 2-3 centimeters thick, and it's like, here's every bond measure you can vote on, and they're all written so sneakily so that you have no idea what you're voting for or against, and they just throw big numbers around. And yes, I wish there were some sort of TLDR version that says, look, here's what you're really voting for or against. Nick.
Well, now we have AI to do all the summarizing. And actually, I've got a plugin for one of my. Yeah, there we go. Somebody just said it. Ada just said the same thing, and it's exactly right. That's probably what AI is best suited to do, and why, unfortunately, content folk, copywriters, etc., are, their jobs are being replaced in many cases, which is a real problem. But when AI's validity and source validity and all the other issues are resolved, yes, absolutely. You can ask AI, pointed at a page at a big chunk of really complicated text, and say, hey, summarize this for me as if I was a 10-year-old. And it will, and it does. And it does a really great job of it. So the plugin I've got for my browser provides like an AI summarizer automatically, whether I ask for it or not, all the time. Sometimes it's completely whack, but sometimes it's actually really useful. It's pretty useful,
I like that idea. I think that's something people can try in the next election, because usually these ballot measures or these candidate positions are up on the web somewhere, and we can certainly say, hey, summarize this and tell me what this person stands for or what I'm voting for or against.
Yeah, or cut and paste those nasty legalese terms and conditions, that you've never wanted to read, that you always cut it into the AI, ask it, how's this thing screwing me over, or where's it taking advantage of me, or what should I be concerned about? And the AI will highlight it for you. You're still going to sign it and say yes because you want to use the service, but at least you'll be informed.
Yeah, and I always recommend talking to lawyers rather than asking AI, because AI doesn't have a great track record yet and doesn't replace a lawyer yet. So, I would say ask AI legal questions for your own entertainment, but not to replace a lawyer. That would be my advice at this time. So yeah, let's see our next question. Thanks to the person who sent that in. This one says, thanks for taking the time to answer our questions. After discovery research, we find several opportunities and started working on them. How can we ensure that the product or feature we are developing will provide the necessary value to our customers and that it's something people will actually use and love? I keep hearing about conducting usability testing to validate my ideas, but while usability testing can indicate whether a product or feature is usable, easy to find, etc., it doesn't tell us whether it's desirable or whether people will adopt it. Ooh.
Love it. That's a good question. It's a great question. One. It really is. It's a good one, because this is kind of the product manager's life, if you know what I mean. This is their neurosis on a page kind of thing. But it affects us all. We're all product team members, generally speaking. So how can you be sure you're building the right thing, as I think is the kind of the undertone here is how do I know that it's desirable? And everything in UX, at least according to me, from my perspective, and most UXs, frankly, this isn't a unique Nick thing. We all talk about user needs, and I always bring everything back to a user need. Now, if you, through your discovery, have discovered a fundamental user need, that user need is the one that's it's how you execute that user need in a product, right? And it solves pain and all kinds of stuff. When you're designing or building to a user need, you've got a much higher level of confidence that it's going to be desirable. You want to do a thing in the world, but you can't do the thing in the world because there's a pain point involved. There's a blocker. You can't do it. So this is where jobs to be done comes in, kind of thing. It's where you'll get a thing to help you overcome that pain to meet your need so you can achieve a thing, right? That's the the basics of life in a nutshell. As long as you're doing something to alleviate that pain or to meet that need, there's a good chance it's desirable. I think that's the way I look at the world. The real million-dollar question is how sure are you of those user needs? And that's why we as user researchers exist in the world today. That's why AI will never replace us. But that's another thing.
Yeah, so with you there. And Karen was just saying, yesterday I asked an AI to solve a math equation. After the answer, I typed, "Are you sure?" and never received a yes answer. The AI just kept changing its answers. Yikes.
Yes. If you look at on the, let's not get too sidetracked on AI, or let's talk about it after this question. But you'll see I've put up some fails on LinkedIn recently, where I've challenged it and said, "Hey, what about custom integrations or whatever it was?" And it goes, "Oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, I've made that up." If you don't challenge the AI, it will get away with murder. It will take liberties. Sorry, it started raining here. I hope that's not being picked up on my mic. It will take liberties, and they are amazingly good-looking, hard-to-tell liberties that you won't know. They're very compelling, convincing lies, hallucinations, stuff. But if you don't challenge, you won't know. That's the problem. And every time I challenge it now, because I'm like, wait a minute, you've just listed something that is completely unfamiliar to me. I don't remember seeing that in the transcript or the interview. And he goes, "Oh yeah, you're right." Whoops.
I made that shit
up.
That's
not what you want to hear from your AI. Sorry.
Yeah, we did. There's a playlist on the new YouTube channel, CX-CC, Customer Experience, Customer Centricity, and it's a new playlist called CX Audits. And we just have done a few episodes so far, but I did one on Google Bard, and I showed how I asked it some extremely concrete questions, like, I want to fly on this day from this city to this city. What are some good flights? And it invented flights that didn't exist. And I asked it how often its flight data was updated, and it said every 24 hours. So this is not a case of it hasn't been trained on anything since 2021. It literally has fresh flight data, and it still invented flights that didn't exist. And when I said, no, that flight doesn't go between Olbia and Rome, it was like, oh, yes, you're right. Sorry about that. Then it's like, why am I even doing this? But
why
back
am I
to
doing this? Exactly.
Back to this question, which I wanted to also answer. I agree with what Nick said, and what the note that I made here is usability test for solving the problem or addressing the need. And I think it's a mistake a lot of people make in their usability testing. They just look for, is it usable? Can people get through the task? And they're not looking at, as they're getting through the task, can we use our observational research skills to determine if this is really solving the original problem or need that we identified. And as Nick pointed out, if we have not written a good problem statement, if we have not defined that problem well or done the best research around it, or at least halfway decent research, then there's a really good chance, even if we make some sort of okay feature or flow people can get through, it doesn't mean that they're going to adopt it. Most of the stories that have come out publicly about things not being adopted usually came from market research or some sort of flawed research where someone sent out a survey and said, if we made a cup for you to drink liquid out of, would you buy it? And everybody said yes. And then they made a 1 liter cup the size of your head, and everyone said, F that, I didn't want that cup. And then people said, I don't get it, nobody's buying our new cup. Everybody in the survey said they wanted a cup. And we have to remember that a lot of these, the way these surveys are written, people don't know the exact execution of your idea. They don't know how big the cup is. They don't know what it's going to hold or be made of. They don't know what it's going to cost. And they're just answering quite generally, sure, a cup sounds good. And so you don't know if you have a bad idea or a good idea, but a bad execution of it. So I agree with Nick that the root of all of this, the core, is going to be your evidence, your data, your research, and then use your usability testing to see, did we solve that problem?
Exactly. Or did we meet that need? If you don't do things this way, which frankly is the majority of the world, the UX UI design thinking posse, you're always going to have a hard time, because you're going to have to market and spend a lot of time marketing something kind of. The note I've written down is symptom and cause, if you know what I mean. One is dealing with something superficial and one's dealing with the root cause. If you're only dealing with something superficial, like here's a cool, pretty thing, or here's a half a journey, then you've got to push that much harder with marketing. Whereas if you're meeting a real user need or solving a pain point, it almost sells itself. Then it's an awareness thing. But I hope you understand what I'm saying. If you're driving in a user need, then your level of confidence is fundamentally different. But you have to know what the user need is that you're designing to.
Yeah, and Karen said, some PMs and founders have said if users are not paying for or adopting your feature or product, it's not desirable. And I think that that's jumping to a conclusion, because if people aren't using a thing, is it because it's not desirable, or they didn't need it, or they didn't need that execution or that design? There are so many times that companies come out with features and we go, okay, I needed something in this realm, but not this. And so,
Yeah.
the question, so does that mean it's not desirable? Maybe your exact execution of it and how you chose to create it is not desirable, but that doesn't mean people don't need something.
Yeah, like let's take Figma, right? I need a prototyping tool. Figma will do that job, but it won't do it in the way that I need it to. So it'll meet my need, but not meet it in the need that I properly need it to. You see what I'm saying? So that's not a great example, but it's a bit like Debbie's example of I need a cup, but just not that cup.
Yeah, and Karen
Also,
is saying,
there are levels of user need.
sorry, Karen is saying, if we're doing this usability testing to try to figure out if we solve the problem, what are we looking to observe?
So I wouldn't necessarily say that usability testing is always the way forward. And things get a bit more tricky here because we're in a post-pandemic world, and all of this book needs to be rewritten as to how we do remote research that is behavioral without violating privacy, which is a complete nightmare, which isn't going to happen probably in our working lifetimes. You'd really, in the pre-pandemic world, which is probably the easiest way I can characterize this, there's things like ethnography or contextual inquiry, where I want to watch somebody doing the thing in the actual context of use. I want to see how they're using it, when they're using it, all kinds of interesting triggers, important points that help me understand how that need how that need lives, how it's executed, how they are working to solve that need, what pain points come into it. All of this stuff is to be known. How do you do that remotely? To be answered. I don't have those answers right now. In a perfect world, and if I had a magic wand and privacy wasn't a concern, we'd be logging everything on all of these machines we're working on right now, and then I could query it all through logs. But guess what? That's never going to happen for obvious privacy reasons. So if I can't go down to the offices anymore because people are all at home, how do I do this more behavioral stuff? That's what bugs me, but that's another separate issue. Usability testing, when you're doing it in usability testing, you're trying to listen out for all those contextual things that you would probably get when you're actually in the context. You may be asking stuff around that and try to uncover, when might this happen? When has this happened in the past? Can you tell me a time? All of that stuff. But for me, it's a lot less reliable. It's eyewitness reporting, constructing stuff based around memory, much less reliable. Actually getting down there and watching people is much more reliable, in my humble opinion. But we can't do it these days. This is where we're at.
And what I would add to that is, if we are trying to do some sort of evaluative testing where we're trying to see if we really solved a problem or need, what I would do is, hopefully in our original research, we did some sort of task analysis, or maybe you believe in jobs to be done. I prefer task analysis. Hopefully we should have some sort of look at how people were doing a thing and where that was going wrong and where we thought the opportunities were. Now that we think we've solved that with this feature or design or product or service, whatever it is, we should be able to ask the person to now do the task, presumably including our prototype or product, and just the way we observed how the task went in the generative research, we can now observe how the task goes in the evaluative research. Again, whether you're working from a prototype or a dev build or a live product, I would say you're still asking people to perform a task. You're looking at how the task goes. You're looking at where there's room for improvement, and you're looking for, did we solve that original problem or address what we thought was a need or opportunity?
The stuff that I was saying, the stuff that Debbie's saying is great, and it works particularly well for feature-based stuff when the context is kind of within an app, and that's all. But when you're talking about more like, when would you use this app, or when do you pull your mobile phone out of your pocket to do a thing, that's the stuff that I'm talking about, which is much harder to do in that context.
Totally true. Yep. Okay, we've got a question from Adair, who says, I'm curious to hear what's your take on how Web3 might impact UX in the future. What should we be looking out for, and how should we prepare? Gosh, Web3 doesn't feel like the future anymore.
I'll be brutally honest. I don't even know what Web3 truly is. It was one of those buzzwords floating around with blockchain and NFT and what was the other one? Non-fungible token, NFTs. Yeah. And I was just like, do you know what? I'm going to wait for this word vomit to kind of settle down, and then I'll get involved once it's settled down. NFTs are dead, so that was I'm glad I didn't waste my time with any of that. Multiverse is still way too premature. Is still probably 2 to 5 years away in the least. And with regards to Web3, I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know what it is. I'm too busy just trying to keep UX, any form of user-centric, with the technologies that we have available today. So that's where honestly I can't answer this, just because I don't know.
Shiwat likes that you have a halo because of your new background.
I don't have a halo, man. It's more like kind of amorphous, kind of.
It's your aura.
Yeah, it's my aura. There we go. I prefer that. Halo.
So what I would add to this is Web3 doesn't feel like the future. I think if people want to try to do UX around Web3, then you have to start studying blockchain and related technologies. A lot of the Web3 stuff centers around blockchain and things that they say are non-centralized or decentralized. This is definitely not my area of expertise. I know we did a show on some of this stuff. Sorry, that's a premature gong. The gong assumed that this was a 25-minute show. It is not. We shall continue on till the full hour. We did a show, it was like episode 130 something over on the Delta CX channel, where Bettina, Bettinna, was our guest, and she's a Web3 and UX expert. You might want to give that a watch with some of her ideas, but because this isn't my area of expertise, and I think a lot of it is still quite slippery, I don't have good advice. I know that in general, it's not an area I'm looking to work in because I still find it kind of slippery.
And even more established things like, blockchain, the whole crypto thing, which is definitely the future, but is still very, very unresolved. And all it takes is another like FTX or whatever it was, the scandal with Sam Bankman-Fried and all of that stuff. I mean, I was very close to landing a head of research job at a really big crypto company as a permanent role when that thing went down. And they said, look, I'm sorry, it's not you. You had the job. We had one or two more rounds of interviews to just walk through, and you were there. But the confidence in the market is gone. We're not hiring across the board, and that can happen any time in one of these really nascent industries. So
good point.
It's not something. UX is already pretty rocky. I don't know if that's another rock you want to encounter.
Totally good point there. Okay, we got a question in anonymously, and it looks like this. Hey Debbie, and I guess Nick too. I'm a UX researcher that is constantly asked to do concept testing on prototypes that aren't interactive, and I'm at a loss for what to do to make these sessions more useful. I feel like I'm showing Figma images of the process and just asking users what they think they would do. It isn't great. Any suggestions for how to get out of this cycle? I don't think I can get good feedback on how easy or difficult to understand or use a potential solution is if the prototype just represents one happy path. Ooh, I have a lot to say about this. Nick, you first. We're in the
we
same
can both
bucket
go
here.
crazy. Yeah, like I'm like, this is that. First of all, to the ask of that question, that's a fantastic question. All the questions of today have been particularly awesome. The question you're asking is on the lips of probably most of our marketplace right now. It's one of those unspoken things. There's a lot of leaders who don't agree with this stuff, and that's why people aren't really being that vocal about it. Your concerns, your instinct is totally spot on, in my humble opinion. You are right. I agree with you, or at least I am from the same perspective. You are only just showing static images and all the other BS that you've highlighted. This is not UX as we know it, unfortunately. It's design review kind of thing. It's some weird thing. How do you get out of this cycle is a really difficult question, though. The issues that you've raised is brilliant, but how do you get out of it? In a more perfect world, you cut to Azure, you'd be doing Azure prototypes. They'd be much more interactive and much higher interactive fidelity, which means you could then start to test actual behavior instead of what people think of the pictures that you're showing them. God, I can't even believe we're having to say this in 2023. It's so crazy, isn't it? I can't see, I don't know the size of your organization, if it's possible to switch over to Azure. I think that's a quick and easy way of doing that. It's not cheap. It's about 500 quid a seat a year, I think. And there is a learning curve to it, but it will solve that problem. The bigger problem is the cultural shift and the kind of the transformation that needs to happen in getting people to accept something that is maybe much more black and white. And they'll go, well, why are we doing black and white? There's no value in it unless it's high fidelity. All of those rucks with design leaders that generally come about. All I can tell you, and I'm pretty 99.999% sure that Debbie would say the same thing, low fidelity rapid prototype testing with something like Azure does a fantastic job, and there's nothing in the world that has done a better job since or can do it as well currently. That's where I've got all my wins from. I'm pretty sure that that's where Debbie's got all of her wins from. It's very hard. Yeah, we're neither of us are sponsored by Azure. I'm not even a licensee of Azure because it's too bloody expensive. You hear that, Victor?
He so doesn't care.
I know. But that would be the easy one. What I would be working on is what you need to try to work on is try to get people to understand that Figma is only eliciting self-reported opinions, and the validity of that, like what it really means, is really low. And that means when you build the thing, it's not going to have the same response or the same reception as the one that you tested. And that's going to cause a shitstorm of pretty large proportions, and nobody really wants to experience that. So to avoid that, you want to test something in a more realistic way, and that requires more interactivity, and the only answer to that these days, generally speaking, is Azure. However, there are code ways of doing this too, actually, as I'm saying that, right? So here's another option. Using staging servers, testing servers, non-production, non-product servers, to then, I've done this all the time, get them to fork the code for you, stick it on a server for you, if they are happy to, or just a test server that you can then test with your users. That means you can then, if you've got development resource, you can get them to change it, your little fork of it, and you're actually working in code. If the opportunity arises, try that out. The way to sell this to the wider business is sell it as a thin slice. Let's try it as one unit, one business unit, one team. See how it goes. It'll work great, and then everybody else will want to do the new cool thing that works. That's probably the simple, long answer.
Yeah, and I've made some additional notes while you were talking. And so when I have seen evaluative research done on Figma prototypes and the research ended up kind of disastrous, the Figma prototype was not at all realistic. In some cases, the researcher ended up having to walk people through it because they couldn't figure out what to do, and they couldn't really explore or try it themselves because it didn't have any sort of interactive realism. The mistake that I've seen happen next was the researcher gave a very, I guess, milquetoast might be the word, a very fluffy report back to the team. People eventually made it through and I had to help them a little, but this design's probably okay. Maybe it's pretty close if it had a few small changes. And I think that is a mistake. I think it's a mistake to paint the testing experience and the product or design or whatever it is as better than it is, or closer to finished than it is, or good enough. I think that's not being really true to the job you've been asked to do. So first of all, I think it's going to be important, in case you're not, that you're giving much more honest whether that's debriefs or readouts or reports or presentations, to say, because this is a prototype that is not realistic to use at all, people can't fill out a form, they can't get an error message, they can't experience this in a realistic way. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you that this is a good design or not. I think you're going to have to just tell them, I understand that you were turning to me to validate or invalidate this design or tell you where there's room for improvement, but unfortunately, this cannot be done with a prototype in this condition. Here's a couple of video clips I want to show you where people just couldn't use this realistically. They wanted to use this menu, the menu didn't function like a menu. They wanted to type in this box, you can't type in this box. I was watching them about to go in the wrong direction. The prototype wasn't built to go in the wrong direction, which means they immediately knew they were going in the wrong direction. The prototype wouldn't let them do the thing. So here's a couple of video clips that show you that we are not getting the feedback we need. Now this is where, Nick is certainly right. Even if you don't have Axure, you can ask developers to create a dev prototype for you or a dev build, but that is very risky. Very often, once developers code something, there's going to be someone somewhere who says, well, we spent all that time coding it, let's just put it out there. We'll fix it later. And so I'm always nervous about having developers build this unless, and I've seen this rarely, unless you have developers allocated to the UX department where they know they're making prototypes and they know these prototypes might end up being totally scrapped and there's no pressure to use the code that we've built. So Nick is right. That is a great way to go. It is extremely realistic, but I always worry that people are just going to act all sunk cost fallacy about it and say, well, look, we built a thing, let's just run with that thing. The other thing that I think that you need to give your perspective and say, look, I want to be able to test this and to be able to tell you if it's solving the right problems and if it's usable and if it's going in the right direction and blah, blah, blah. But as much as everybody loves Figma, Figma is just not the right tool for the job at this time. Yes, they're adding features, but we're not there yet. And that means we need to pick a different tool for the job. If we want to do usability testing, Figma just doesn't cut it. Some months ago, somebody contacted me because I'd put something in our Slack community. I am asking a self-proclaimed Figma ninja to make me a Figma prototype of one of the most complex Axure prototypes I've ever made. I want to see how close that person can get to what I built in Axure. Nick, I know. I'm going to take them both to usability testing on my own dime. I'm going to usability test it and pay the participants. And I'm going to be able to do a show and tell you, here was the difference in the data I got back, or the evidence I got back, because of the difference in prototype. Same researcher, same design, same questions. The Figma person hasn't gotten in touch with me in a while, so I don't know when that's going to happen. If any of you feel like you are Figma ninjas, please contact me. I would love for you to take on this challenge, and of course we'll plug you on the channel in return. I am not paying for the Figma prototype to be built. So I think
There's no way.
But we have
There's no way that they can do that. And if it's one of your most complex eggs yours, it's never going to happen, man. No way.
I think it's still worth us putting apples and oranges together and saying, everyone look at the apples and oranges. Let's say this out loud. Chiwat says, seems like there aren't enough experienced UX leaders who can advocate for what's needed to practice UX efficiently. Hence, so many of these blockers to UXers who want to do their job properly. Yeah, and a lot of people forget that even though Axure is expensive, number one, it's around the same price as Figma, depending upon what tier you're in with Figma. And number two, not everyone on the freaking planet needs an Axure license. And many companies right now, everyone and their grandma is going into people's Figma files, which is probably a nightmare, but it means lots of Figma licenses for engineers and product managers and everybody who wants to get into your Figma file and mess with stuff, which I hear is a constant nightmare. In Axure, we can share our prototypes with people without them having a license. You only really need to license the designers or anybody who's going to be building these prototypes. If you have 10 designers at your company, get 10 Axure licenses, or get 5 and be sneaky sneaks. But I think that ultimately you can do this for less money than you think. Even if Axure is $500, $600, $700 a year, and I am currently paying for it, though I often wonder why, because I haven't had as much design work lately. We've been doing more research. I think it's still worth it. You know, the question is, what is it worth? And the other thing I was going to mention to the person who asked the question is, let's think about Agile. We keep being told that Agile says we must get feedback early to see that we're going in the right direction. Collect feedback. Well, where do you think that feedback comes from? We're not Agile if we're not getting feedback until this thing goes out into the public. Now we've released it. Now we've embarrassed ourselves. Now we have a mess to clean up, a la Zoom this week, even though that's got nothing to do with agility. But remind your coworkers, if we really want to be agile and we care about getting feedback, and especially if we know that feedback should come early, then we need to be running testing on appropriate prototypes that are models. We couldn't ask someone to drive a clay version of a car that has no motor to find out if people are going to want this car. We model cars and then we model cars again, and we keep doing more realistic versions of the cars until we know we've got the right car solution. Joan says, it sounds like the team isn't clear on what their research questions are. Maybe they're doing remote testing. You can always ask your testing participants, what would you expect to happen there if they go down the wrong path? The problem is, in Figma, that's going to be every second. People are going to try to click on something. It's not going to work. You're going to say, what would you expect to happen? But that's very, very different than watching people actually go down the wrong path and make that mistake and do the wrong thing that they were sure was the right thing. That is such a wonderful piece of data, and we block that great data so much by keeping people from going down the path they wanted to go down, and instead we just ask them, what'd you think was going to happen? And I recognize that's been a stand-in question for maybe decades, but I think we can do better. Nick, something to add to this?
Defending this stuff hard, because you're somebody I know, I appreciate all of that, but can't you just do something anyway? And that's where the problems come in, because it's like, before Figma, I was given InVision stuff to test, which was the same kind of a nightmare. You know, where would you click? And it's no good. Or what would you do? What did you think was going to happen? It's no good. I mean, I can't deliver anything of any value when I'm given that sort of source. But the problem is not that fact. The fact is when you turn around to somebody and say, I can't test this thing, and they'll say, well, why not? And then you start to look obstructive or difficult or a prima donna or whatever you want to call that. And that's really hard. And they're saying, look, man, we're all on the same team here. We're all hustling. We're all trying to make money and blah, blah, blah. Can't you do something with it? And you're like, well, no, I can't, because it's all meaningless crap. but people can't accept that. And they don't want to, there's no easy solution to this one. It's a hard position to be in. That's the problem. You don't want to go to war with your design leadership, but there's a challenge there. And I think a perfectly valid challenge.
Yeah, and the other problem is that you definitely run the risk that someone says, well, if you can't do this testing, I guess we don't need you, and you end up
exactly.
undoing your own job. And it's not that there's something wrong with you, it's that this can't be done and you know it. So this is where I think you have to talk to managers.
We had this with the wireframe monkey about 6-7 years ago, when people, just after the gold rush around 2015, people wanted this UX thing, and they said, go on, do UX. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do some research. But no, just go straight to the wireframe bit, please. Just do me some wireframes. And it's like, no, I'm not here to just do you wireframes. That's not what UX is. And that's how UX UI kind of started, with people just wireframing. That's the problem, is we're not, I can't remember what I'm saying, the reason why I was saying that. Wireframe monkey. The point is we're being asked to do something. Oh, help me. What was I just... I've lost it. It's gone. Shit. Ignore me. Shame on me. Gone. Sorry. Brain flipped and it just disappeared literally as I was saying it. What can I say?
It happens. We still have another 20 minutes if people have questions. Sorry, I'm getting some tech support here.
I think what I'm trying to say is you can't just be a blind order taker, and just do wireframes, just test a Figma prototype. You know what I mean? Just say yes. What happened in the wireframe monkey days was that if you said, I'm going to do research, they'd replace you, or as a contract, they'd replace you with somebody who would do the wireframing. And I think that was kind of my point. Yeah, and gets me. It's a tough situation to be in, because if you say no, they may well turf you and replace you with somebody who will. And there's a lot of yes people out there who will do the equivalent of wireframe monkey work, right? Which is testing Figma prototypes badly, doing checkbox research, and it's all got no validity. That stuff. That's what we're trying to avoid. That's what all the fights are about.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are caught up to questions. If anyone has a question, you are next. No waiting. Short queue. Let me also remind everybody that we've got a totally new system to sign up for our free webinars. Some of you may or may not know we're moving shows off of the live stream into a free live webinar kind of scenario because YouTube hates live streams and deprioritizes them in the algorithm. So what we're going to do is more live webinars, record them, and then put them up on YouTube as pre-recorded shows. So if you want to sign up for those webinars, they're totally free. Just look at the link over Nick's head. It says cxcc.to/webinars. Yes, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Vanna White. And it's a new system that I'm probably paying for. Adevent.com, not sponsored, I'm paying. And basically, you can RSVP, or you can add our entire calendar to yours, and you will never miss a thing, because obviously with 2 YouTube channels and stuff moving to webinars, it can be a little confusing to figure out where's Waldo today. So please check that out. And our next webinar is going to be 2 weeks from tomorrow, right? No, 1 week from tomorrow. We're going to be doing a brand new version of the quadrant exercise. I've updated the quadrant exercise. I've written some new slides around it, and we are going to be doing that live together. So please come and sign up for that. I think we have like 86 people signed up for it so far. Even if 20 show up, that'll be awesome. So yes. Okay, Anne has a question. I'm wondering when and why being a design system expert became a thing, and what you think about it.
That's more of the design influence, or design kind of steamroll of UX. there's so many designers in UX or wearing UX hats, and every designer that I speak to, they want to, they want to become more efficient in their design by creating or maintaining a design system. And that seems to be not the way. I don't have any opinion on that because I'm not a designer in that regard. But that's just my observation, is that design systems are things that design folks really like. But for me as a UX person, the only design system I've ever managed has been kind of Axure widget libraries, and I'm creating masters and things to help myself go faster. But that's as much as kind of an opinion on that. I don't. It so much depends upon the culture that you're working in as to whether design system is like the overlord or not. Sometime I've worked with many design systems, but I'm not a design systems expert at all. When I'm working as a designer, you give me a design system, I'll work within it. In terms of creating them, I've not got anything to say about that. I've never been asked to do that. It's not something that's really in my wheelhouse that I'm comfortable with. It feels much more proper design, or design with a capital D, than anything that at least I've experienced historically in UX. But that's just my perspective.
I was in tech support hell and I was only half listening. I apologize, but the angle I'm going to take on this one is I am. Many of you know I'm not an artist. I'm not a visual designer. I'm not a brand designer. I should not make your design system. I'm not good at it. I can look at your design system and I can see if it seems to be consistent, if it seems to be accessible. These are things that I can do. But to me, a design system is something that helps me focus on being an information architect and interaction designer. Because if you say, oh, well, a UX designer should be able to do all the things, and I say, but I don't have to. If you have a component library or a design system, then I don't have to invent what your typography looks like. I don't have to decide how round corners of buttons are. This has been pre-decided and this exists. I can now focus on being an information architect and an interaction designer. So I'm very happy when a company has, whether they call it a UI kit or a component library or a design system, I'm very happy when sometimes it's a branding style guide, when these things are in place, because then they're going to let me just be a problem finder and problem solver, and I can just use the design system and put those pieces into place rather than being responsible to create that design system or improve it. That's not where my talent and skills are. So I am generally for design systems if they're being done well, if they have the right planning and oversight and organization and governance, so that everybody understands what this is and how it's used. And it's also better for us to work with engineering, because it used to be the front-end developers, Nick and I are old enough to remember when front-end developers had to write fresh code every time you gave them a screen. And now we have predefined classes, we have predefined styles, and that's just going to make the product more consistent and easier to change in the future because you have classes and styles. So should everybody be a design system expert? I don't know. Maybe because UX and UI keep colliding more and more, and people think that you should be a genius artist and a genius information architect, interaction designer, then sure, you should be all the things to all the people. But I think outside of job overload, design systems are a good thing, but I do tend to admire the companies that have one or two designers, visual designers, and accessibility specialists completely allocated to the design system, and it's not everybody's responsibility. Malika says, I feel like design systems just a tool, like a brand style guide, just part of the big picture that makes products and services work. And says, seems like it's more and more in job requirements. Yeah, because people want a design system and they want an artist to make it. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, but there's some reality to be called out here. Okay, it isn't all like plain sailing and happy clappy stuff, right? I work with design systems all day and every day. The big one in the UK is GDS, is the government design system. What happens when you've got a user need or a pain point and you're working with a designer and the solution, the on-page solution, isn't supported by the design system? That's when the fun happens. That's when the shenanigans happen. It isn't all plain sailing. There's usually a ton of discussions and meetings and stuff and that goes off around, can we break the design system? Can I work outside of the design system? Am I allowed an exception for my business unit, for my team? It gets really 7 shades of funky at that point. And it's not easy. There's a ton of benefits to all of this stuff, but there's also some really practical, practitioner level problems when the pieces of Lego that you've got in front of you can't be used to solve the problem that you've got, that you've learned about, that your users are having. That's a big one. So that's, for example, I'm going to give you an example. In the GDS system, which is great, and it's super accessible and does lots of brilliant things. Help text. There's no obvious help text mechanism in the whole library. The only one is a drop-down chevron. It's a chevron accordion style, and you click and it drops down to give some text. That's not the best contextual help system available, really, and it's the only one that, as far as I'm aware, is in the GDS system. And that's a phenomenon. You're doing long flows of complex government stuff, of sign-ups and registering and all this kind of stuff. There are lots of fields in form design, and you need contextual help in form design, but yet the system isn't really there to support it. So this is the stuff that happens. You live and learn, and it makes you a better person through the experience, I guess.
Hopefully. We probably have time for the last question that just came in anonymously. Malika says, I'd love to hear more. So the question that came in says, what is ethical fading and how does it relate to the field of UX?
I'm just Googling it.
I Googled it as well, and basically it's cognitive dissonance. When I Googled it, it said, ethical fading is a form of self-deception. It occurs when we subconsciously avoid or disguise the moral implications of a decision. It allows us to behave in immoral ways while maintaining the conviction that we are good moral people.
Yeah, that's like saying I work for big evil company, but if I didn't do it, somebody else would do it. Right?
I work for big evil company, but I'm different. I'm helping people.
Yeah, or I'm doing it with the right attitude, and I'm going to try and make evil company less evil by doing good within evil. Or that's all rationalization. I guess that's what you call ethical fading. How does it relate to the field of UX? Well, shit. I mean, frankly, I have done it. We've all done it because we've all got ethics, and then we've got the bills to pay. That's the truth, in my humble opinion. I've got, I worked on blood diamond stuff. I worked on tobacco. I've worked on big pharma. I've worked on big oil. I've worked in some industries that are probably fairly controversial. And I've had all those conversations with myself and my wife to say, look, I'm not really that comfortable doing this work, but it pays and I need to pay the bills. So, and if I didn't do it, somebody else would do it. And all those rationalizations. The problem is that we've all got a need to pay the bills is making the world a really bad place, both environmentally and on many other levels. So something has to give. And I can't see it being us going, well, I'm just going to be principled about this and go hungry or go without my mortgage or food or pay the rent or whatever it is you need to do. I think it needs to come from governments and from legislation because, governments, corporations want to earn as much money for the markets and we just want to pay our bills. There's no one stopping this kind of slide. So you rationalize, ethically fade or whatever you call it, to cope effectively. That's how I view the situation.
Yeah, and I think that there's always stories that we tell ourselves for better or worse. And this probably just goes in that bucket. There are white lies we tell each other. There are big lies and small lies, and this goes in that bucket too. I think that that you don't have to sacrifice ethics to make money, but very often if you will sacrifice ethics, there's a lot of money to be made. And sometimes the companies know that. I mean, when I see some of the salaries that Facebook and Meta pay, they're not market salaries. You know, they're sometimes 4 times that. Now, why? You know, you would think everyone's dying to work for Facebook or Meta and get them on their resume and beef it up. You would think that they could pay you 3 cents. But instead they have to pay you 4 times what everybody else in America is making. And I think it's because they know that they are renting your soul for a certain period of time, and that there are things that you're going to have to excuse and rationalize and struggle with while you are there. That is my opinion and guess. I can't say that that is the internal conversation anyone there has had about salaries. That is my opinion and guess. So how does any of this relate to the field of UX? I would say stepping away from ourselves and our own choices and jobs, ultimately choices we make about the products we are building, the products, the services, the features, the experiences should be in service to customers and users and that ecosystem. Now there's also what the business needs, and sometimes the business wants what's bad for customers and users in the ecosystem. That means we end up having to find a way to balance these two. When these two are out of balance, we normally end up in some territory that feels somewhere between kind of wrong and really unethical. And that's when we're going to have to deal with rationalization or cognitive dissonance or ethical fading or some sort of story we're going to tell ourselves so that we can sleep at night. And ultimately, the story I want you to tell yourself is do your best, and then tell yourself you did your best. If you did your best and you stood up for the user and someone still decided to do something garbage or unethical, you did your best. And maybe you're along for the ride, and maybe you're looking for another job. But I think you should only have a crisis of personal ethics if you need to have a crisis of personal ethics. Otherwise, a lot of us are good people who went into companies or products that we didn't know or didn't fully know were going to be as bad as they are. I've had a few people message me privately, I won't name you, who said, hey, I went to Facebook because they told me I was really going to be helping small businesses. And that so many small businesses use Facebook and they rely on it, and I'm going to make it better for them. And it only took a couple of months for me to see that wasn't true. But then, do I quit? Do I quit so fast? Do I leave a job 2 months in? Do I walk away from this money? Look, these are all your personal decisions, and very often we cannot change the moral fiber of a company. So you stay as long as it suits you, and if you have to tell yourself some stories along the way, you will. I hope that was okay. Sorry, it's a little depressing.
I'm getting pretty close to super gluing myself to, like, you know, to a big oil or somebody like the activists are, because you know what I mean, environmentally it's not okay. And like we've got big companies here in the UK who are investing in fossils and stuff, fossil fuels, you know, and all of this stuff. We've got such good brains around this world, and we're all just like being paid off by corporations to shut up and do the bad thing, and it makes me unhappy. But if I was that person being paid all that money, I would probably do exactly the same. So let's just tell it like it is.
Yeah, and everybody's got their own lines. You know, when I first started, one of my first clients when my company was more of a web design company in the mid-90s was like an ultimate fighting organization where, you know, kickboxers, fight boxers, and, you know, like that was all, you know, someone had introduced them to me and I was like, whoa, paying work, I'll take it. And I remember the day they called me up and they said, we need you to add something to the website. And we need you to add that Penthouse pets will be ring card girls. Now that was a lot of lingo. So for those of you who don't know, Penthouse pets are women who have posed nude in the middle of a magazine, and ring card girls are the girls who walk around a fighting match holding up the number of what round the fighting match is in. And that's when I decided, I don't think I can keep working with these people. That's just my personal choice. And it was also funny because at the same time, I was just about to win, which I did end up winning the business of the Miss America organization, who obviously at the time was on a much higher moral ground. And so my thought was, okay, the Miss America organization is funky in its own way, but I think I'm going to get rid of the other client. And so, I just said, we're just going to be too busy with Miss America. And we also had the Liberace Museum. We soon after Miss America got the Liberace Museum in Vegas, which since closed. And I was able to just say, oops, sorry, too busy. Please find another web designer. That's where I made the choice. But, should I have made it earlier, later? We can debate that forever. I made it when it was right for me. And if you have a choice like that, you'll make it when it's right for you. Karen says it's easy to swallow by saying we have gamification in place, but in reality, we are making people do things more. Nick, anything to add? We're out of time.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is, and I think you said it earlier, true user-centric UX means making money without needing to screw people over. And that's why I, Debbie, others, were all such advocates of this real UX thing. Because when I say it makes the world a better place, I mean that in practical terms, without screwing people. You don't have to be evil to be good and make loads of money. The point, and that's the point. I think I believe in peace, love, and a fair profit. That's where I'm at. And I think there's lots more money to be made in healthy, good ways that enriches everybody's lives, rather than just, tries to bill people by forgetting that, relying on that they've forgotten that they've subscribed to you. That sort of business model. You know what I mean? Dirty pool, unnecessary.
Yeah. So again, everybody has their own lines, boundaries, definitions. It doesn't pay for me to superimpose mine onto you, and you have to do what helps you sleep at night and whatever that is. So thank you, Dr. Nick. Thank you so much. We're going to see you in another month. I will be running from an airport when we are supposed to be on. So hopefully my plane lands on show, but I'll keep you posted. And Ana Lucia says, that's why I fell in love with UX. It's why I became a therapist. It's why I'm still pursuing a path where I feel like I can help people. Yes, many of us want to help people. We just have to figure out what is the definition of helping people. Whose perspective is it? I'm going to play us out of here, which is still silent. I haven't set up any music on this yet, but thanks again, everybody. Our next show this week is Friday. We have a special Friday show on this channel. Our good friend Oz, who's usually in the audience, is going to be our guest. He is a data scientist and data expert. He is an Excel MVP, and his topic is going to be data and accountability. So everybody join on Friday for Oz. I'm so excited to see him again since my wedding. Okay, thanks again, everybody, and see you soon. Bye.